It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Joining us now is Andy McCarthy, of course, the former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. And Andy, of course, President Trump has had some really interesting news. A lot came from the Supreme Court that can have a huge impact, especially on the New York case. Explain, because there's some new filings that they did, and you think there may be some good points behind it.
Oh, I sure do, Rita. I think the most attention that any case got at the end of the Supreme Court's term was, of course, the immunity case. And there is some crossover between what the court found in that case, which is that if you're talking about a president's official acts that are part of his executive responsibilities, the president has immunity for those, especially if they're at the core of his responsibilities. And the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, and his prosecutors in the case did use evidence of some of former President Trump's official acts. Specifically, they claimed, or they had Michael Cohen, testify that Trump told him that Jeff Sessions, who was then the attorney general, that basically Trump had directed him to put the kibosh on a campaign finance investigation into Cohen and David Pecker that Trump was implicated in. So obviously, if that happened, that's part of the president's core responsibilities, and he'd have immunity for that. But I think the biggest thing is a different case that the court decided a few days before the immunity case, a case called Erlinger, in which they reaffirmed the principle that the important findings in a criminal case have to be made by a jury unanimously. And in this case, of course, Judge Merchan allowed the jury to convict former President Trump in connection with a crime where he told them they didn't need to be unanimous on the most important part of it.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Judge Weinberg.
Andy, I think that's actually incredibly correct. And you had a great column where you talked about that. And you also have the Fisher case, which dealt with the overcharging and the bootstrapping. You know, it seems to me your column made a very good point, which is if Merchan wants to do the right thing, he should be ordering an acquittal here.
Yeah, I don't know, other than what we were able to see, what kind of guy this guy is, Judge. It would seem to me that he's got a very, very, I think even before these cases came out, he's got a very high percentage chance of being reversed by the appellate courts in New York. People keep saying, well, let's get to the Supreme Court. It shouldn't have to get to the Supreme Court. The first court that looks at it, there's about 12 reasons to throw this thing out. And I know how politicized this was and how badly they wanted to be able to call Trump a convicted felon in the run-up to the election. But most judges, you can speak to this better than anyone can. Judges don't like to get reversed. It's embarrassing to get reversed.
Well, Hunter Biden is running the gates at the White House. He's a convicted felon now, too, right?
Hasn't been sentenced yet.
Well, technically, John, none of them are convicted felons.
Right, until.
Yeah, until. Right. A different question, and I know you're not a bankruptcy lawyer. Today, the federal bankruptcy judge threw out Rudy Giuliani's bankruptcy case. Now, is that good for Rudy or bad for Rudy?
Well, it's bad for Rudy in the sense that I believe he sought bankruptcy protection. So obviously, if you're the person, there's a couple of different ways that people end up in bankruptcy court. Sometimes their creditors hold them in there, but other times people are seeking to reorganize. I think most of the time people are seeking to reorganize their own lives when they've gotten into deep financial trouble. And I think that was the case with Rudy, mainly because of this defamation case down in Georgia, where he's looking at big time fines. So if you're looking for a court to give you bankruptcy relief so that you can reorganize and pay some portion of your debts, and the court says no, then obviously that's not an outcome that you want to have.
Understood. I don't think anybody understands the process if it was good or bad for Rudy. That's why I asked you.
Well, I'm a lawyer, but I have more familiarity with being bankrupt.
Ed Cox, any questions?
Yeah, I was just follow up on Judge Weinberg's issue. With respect to the Bragg case, didn't the J6 cases that the Supreme Court decided really bear on it, where they took the Enron law out of context and applied it to a riot? Doesn't that also apply to the Bragg case? And
it's not it doesn't apply to the Bragg case, but it does apply to the January 6th case, the federal prosecution that Jack Smith, the special counsel, brought in Washington. 2 of the 4 counts in that case are the same obstruction statute that the court dealt with in the case you're talking about, Fisher. And the other interesting thing I'd point out is, there are judges, former attorneys general Ed Meese and Mike Mukasey have filed an amicus brief challenging the constitutionality of Jack Smith's status as a special counsel. In the immunity case, Justice Thomas wrote a concurrence in which he says he doesn't think that Smith constitutionally is a special counsel. So that issue is thrumming along as well.
Wow.
I was just making the point that with the Bragg case, weren't the records law with respect to New York taken out of context here and made into a bigger case, and therefore the law, again, like the Enron law,
it was a stretch. In other words, the prosecutor was stretching, overreaching, and stretching.
It was an unprecedented use of what really is a consumer protection statute that they. This was in the civil fraud case. They took a consumer protection statute and they applied it to Trump in a context that had never been applied to someone. And in the criminal case, the Bragg case, what they did was they took a misdemeanor falsification of business records and they turned it into a felony by saying that he was trying to conceal a second crime. And the second crime is the one where I point out that the judge told the jury they didn't need to be unanimous on the main finding in that crime.
And we just have a few seconds left. Are we ever going to get the tapes, you think, from Garland on Biden and Robert Hur? Real quick, what do you think?
I think if we have a Republican Justice Department in January, we may hear them. Wow. Other than that, I doubt it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Andy, thank you. We love having you here, Andy. Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much.